Hello everyone, this is Dr. Jawad. Thank you for tuning to my channel. If you haven't done so already, 4 things. 1, hit the subscribe button down below. 2, the like button. 3, bell notification, because when I upload videos, you'll be first to be notified. And also, if you have a comment or a question, please leave it down below, because I do answer the questions the best I can in short form. However, if they are extensive, this is where I recommend you to go to my webpage, www.totalwellnesstopage.com, and hit the consultation button. Yes, your question is valuable, and I would like to spend some more time with you, either one-on-one or a Zoom call, or if you're in the area, please stop in, because some of these questions have gotten very, very detailed, and I want to give you the fairness of answering them at depth. What's going on, man? Hey, what's going on, man? Doing good. A few of the questions that we get that we want to address in this video is dosage and branding. What do you say about dosage? Dosage? Okay, so this is a good question, because dosage varies according to person. This is why it's dose. I always say it's dose dependent on you, because there's different types of people that require a lower dose versus a higher dose. That is why I always encourage people to do their research. Okay, so what do you say about brands? Because I know we cannot promote brands. Brands? Oh yeah, brands, that's a great question, because there's many brands out there and we cannot promote any certain brands due to copyright laws. So this is why we always encourage you to do your own research, because you're going to do the best research you can. We can only guide you, but you could do the further research to get the better answer. Exactly. Good. Because there's a lot of brands out there. Do your research. Again, I back him up, and I always encourage people to do their own research, because you are very important to your own health as well. We could only do so much. We kind of lead the horse to water, but we could only do so much research for the individual. And thank you for supporting the channel. We really appreciate it, because this channel has been growing a lot in the past couple years, and the more that the channel is recognized, the more that we're out there, the more that we could help people, especially you. So thank you for watching, and continue to watch. We appreciate it. Thank you for the support of the channel as well. We are growing greatly. We appreciate it, because our success is your success, because we can only do it with you and your help. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. Take care now, and keep on watching. Hello everyone, this is Dr. Jawad. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't done so already, again, hit the subscribe button down below, the bell, the like, leave a comment. I've had a lot of comments in regards to my previous videos in regards of gallbladder, bile salts, and bile formation that I'm going to attach on the link below. Now, there's a lot of questions in regards to, should I take a supplement if I have the gallbladder out? Yes, you should. Now again, I'm not promoting any brands in particular, okay, but this is what I use. Now, if you had your gallbladder removed, no ifs, ands, or buts, you need to take some type of digestive support, which this video will explain to you. If you still have your gallbladder, which I still have my gallbladder, but this digestive enzyme and digestive support will help me break down my food product if I go to, like a buffet or something like that. But for the people who don't have their gallbladder, yes, you need something like that, and eat it with the big meals, like a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Don't worry about taking it in with if you have a banana or a yogurt. Take it in with the big stuff. What is the main function of bile? The main function of bile is for fat digestion and absorption. It's made in the liver, and it's stored and concentrated by 20 times in the gallbladder. So every time we have a fatty substance food, it sends a signal to the gallbladder to release bile. Now, the importance of this is the fatty foods, because it's broken down and absorbed in the small intestines to absorb the fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A, D, E, and K. So if you have bad digestion, leaky gut, constipation, diarrhea, and if you're not taking a bile support or a digestive support, when you have a deficiency of vitamin A, you're going to have poor night vision. If you have a deficiency of vitamin D, which again, you should always be taking a vitamin D supplement to get your levels checked. Vitamin D is good for calcium absorption. It's good for the immune system. It's good for the brain. It's good for everything. It's good for hormones. Vitamin E is good for the heart, palpitations. K, you have vitamin K1, which again, if you're a deficiency, this is where you're going to bruise easily. K2, that's good for calcium absorption out of the arterial system and into the bones where it should go. So if you're deficient in any of these vitamins, yes, I always come back to check your diet. Diet is always my first step, because if you are a Porsche or a very high-class car, you need to put good gas in it first and foremost. So let's talk about bile formation and bile salts. Now, I'll go into the question of what's the difference between bile acids and bile salts. In retrospect, there really isn't. There is not a difference in how it actually performs to your bodily functions. Yes, I'm going to go into the explanation of what's the difference between bile acids and bile salts, but pound for pound, it doesn't really matter bile acids or bile salts. It still kind of works in the body the same way. Now, when you eat a fatty food, I'm talking about salmon. I'm not talking about donuts and ho-hos. You're watching the wrong channel if you're hooked on donuts and ho-hos. So when you eat a fatty food like salmon, avocados, what happens is that when it gets processed, it goes to the stomach. The fat stimulates, when it goes to the small intestines, it stimulates the gallbladder to release a hormone called CCK that will release bile into the small intestines. And the bile will help break down the fats into smaller particles. So the food is broken down in the small intestines, and then it's absorbed into what's called the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is part of your immune response. It forms what's called a chylomicron, those like fatty particles. And then it gets recirculated back to the liver. The chylomicrons get recirculated back to the liver, and they're deemed, a nice little coined this term, cholesterol. Now, cholesterol is good for you. It's good for you because it's the arterial band-aid. It helps with hormones. It helps with a lot of other functions, so forth and so on. And bile will actually help with lowering the low density, the bad cholesterol numbers. And I'll go into that and how it explains through the intestinal system. So there's a couple different ways to get cholesterol. One is through food, which I always recommend. Another one is through the formation of acetyl-CoA. So let's start off with the cholesterol. Again, we'll start off the liver. Now, I just drew it as simple forms as a man. As a man that's outstretched, with outstretched hands, and it all looks like, there's circles as the head and the hands. So it starts off as cholesterol. And then it breaks down to what's called primary bile acids. Primary bile acids, and again, I'm just drawing this man just to make so when it goes to the changes, you can see the minor changes. So you have cholic acid and you have chenodeoxycholic acid. So you have cholic acid and you have chenodeoxycholic acid. Those are the two primary unconjugated bile acids. Remember, it's made from the liver, and then it goes into the hepatic ducts and stored in the gallbladder. This is in between meals. And it gets concentrated about 20 times. Now there's different references for the gallbladder. I read 10, it goes all the way from 10 to 20 times. Basically, how I explain the gallbladder and bile, it's like taking a blender. When you put all the goodies in the blender, that's the gallbladder. When you turn the blender on and it spins, that's a concentration. So the function of the gallbladder is like a blender with the smoothie and your protein shake. If you don't turn it on, it's not going to get concentrated. So the gallbladder, again, it's concentrated by 20 times, and we produce about 600 to 700 mLs of bile per day. Half of it's stored in the gallbladder for when we eat a food substance. Now the other gets shunted in the small intestines, and it goes all the way through the small intestines. Through the distal end, you have the duodenum, you have the jejunum, and you have the ileum, which is the terminal end of the small intestine. So intestinal health, the microbiome of the intestines is very, very important for the circulation of bile acids to bile salts. So if you don't have a clean intestinal system, a leaky gut, sure, it's going to affect the formation of bile. So it's going to go all the way to the end, to the terminal ileum of the small intestines. And with the gut bacteria, what it's going to do, the microbiome is going to further metabolize the primary bile acids to secondary bile acids, and the cholic acid is going to turn into deoxycholic acid. The deoxycholic acid is going to turn into lithocholic acid, and in the distal and the small intestines. So what happens, it goes from primary to secondary, and then it's going to circulate. Most of the bile that we have in our body circulates. A small portion, about 5%, is going to move throughout the small intestines to the large intestines into the fecal matter, and this is what gives your fecal matter its color, is the bile. So remember, most of the stuff that we make is recirculated. The body doesn't really want to make things on its own. It wants to recirculate it, but also it wants to be fed the essential nutrients so you have the resources to make it. So the question is, you have it all in the distal ileum. You have the primary bile acids turns into the secondary bile acids. You have the cholic acid, which converts into deoxycholic acid. You have the deoxycholic acid, which converts into the lithocholic acid. That's the secondary bile acids. Remember, 5% of small portion goes throughout the system. It gives your poop its color. Now it wants to be reshunted back to the liver because the body loves to recycle the raw materials. It's a shunt system through the hepatic portal vein, okay, throughout the small intestines. It's called the enterohepatic circulation, and this is where 95% of the bile acids are recirculated, because it goes from the liver, the ducts, the small intestines, back through the hepatic portal vein. Now note, and I'll tell you why it gets shunted back to the liver, because right now, this is an unconjugated bile acid. Bile acid. Now what's the difference between bile acids and bile salts? Wait a minute, Sparky, I'll tell you that in a second. So once it gets shunted back to the liver, this is where it's going to be unconjugated, and what we're going to do now is we're going to make it conjugated, and we're going to go from a bile acid to a bile salt. Okay, the question is, how come is the enterohepatic circulation so important? Because remember, most of it, 95% of it, gets reabsorbed through the hepatic portal vein. Note, what gets recycled is the unconjugated secondary bile acid. So just as a review, remember, it goes through the liver pathway, comes down, it gets into the small intestines, it goes through the distal end, which is the ileum. With the help of gut bacteria, it goes from a primary to a secondary. It kind of gets misshapen. That's the best way to describe it, misshapen. Remember, so the primary goes from cholic acid to deoxycholic acid. Deoxycholic acid goes into lithocholic acid as a secondary bile acid. It gets into the enterohepatic circulation to go back to the liver to get conjugated through a bunch of enzymatic reactions as well, too. I'm not going to go into that part of it. The primary reason it gets recycled back to the liver to become bile salts. This is where the bile acid becomes a bile salt. What's the difference between bile acid and bile salt? In a very generic sense, there's no difference in a way how it works in the system. But this is the most important thing, because in the liver, it gets an amino acid gets attached onto it. So I'm just going to say like a green, let's say in the liver, so the green hat is glycine. The purple hat is taurine. So basically what happens, it gets conjugated with an amino acid. So it's still the same name, it didn't change the name, it's still deoxycholic acid, but that is just a conjugated now deoxycholic acid, because you put a glycine hat on it. The lithocholic acid gets conjugated by putting a purple hat on it. So basically, bile salts are just bile acids, but they're conjugated. Why is this important? Okay, so I cleaned up a lot of this stuff before. All the ingredients of the bile acid I cleaned up, because I want to shunt it over here. So we're still in the liver pathway. Now, why are bile salts so important? simply because they have an amino acid to it. You have taurine and you have glycine, which are two powerful amino acids. So the thing is, the amino acid portion loves water, which makes it hydrophilic. The rest of the body doesn't like water, hydrophobic. And again, they're like little tiny globules. So one side is hydrophilic, they love it. The other side is hydrophobic, they hate it. So why is it so important? Because now, remember, 95% of it's circulated. So now you have all the ingredients that are erased over here in the gallbladder. This is why the conjugated amino acid is so important, because again, half loves and half does not. So what happens is, when therefore when you eat a fatty substance, sure, this is where it gets utilized. So when it goes also through, the other part once it gets recirculated, it goes through, again, the hepatic system, through the small intestines, the distal end. Now this is where it's unique with that gut bacteria. The gut bacteria, what it wants to do is just basically, it wants to take the hat off. It wants to remove that amino acid to get back into the recycling business, because this is where the recycling is so important. And again, it circulates. Unconjugated, primary, secondary, hepatic portal system, now gets conjugated with amino acid, goes through, now again, this is stuff that's now stored in the gallbladder. The other part wants to get recycled, and now this is how it goes. So once we have some food in our system, then what happens? Okay, now let's bring it all together. So when it comes to your stomach, you eat a fatty meal, not a ho-ho and ding-dong and stuff like that. I'm talking about good fish, I'm talking about avocados, I'm talking about something your body could utilize. And the fat is like, it's like grease on a pan. So you have the fat globules with water, because oil and water doesn't mix. So when you have this fatty substance that comes through the stomach to the first part of the small intestines, which is the duodenum, what it does, it moves through and it stimulates the enteroendocrine cells, which will stimulate the release of CCK, cholecystokinin, which cholecystokinin, that sends a signal to the liver and the gallbladder to release bile. Now remember, this is the conjugated bile salts. Because why? Because remember, oil and water, it doesn't mix. So you have one side that's going to break one side down, and you're going to have another side that's going to break the other side down. So it's passing through the first part of the duodenum. CCK is being released to help break it down. Okay, it's going to break it down even more, because what is it going to release? Bile. What does bile consist of? Bile salts, okay, and bile acids, which is going to help break down this big fat globule even more, because your body can't do it on its own. So one part of the body hates water, so that binds to the fatty part. Another part loves water, which exposes it to the outside. And what it's going to do, I drew here, again, the hats respectively, because this is the conjugated bile salts now. It's going to break it down, that fatty substance, even more, because it's too big to be broken down on its own. So you have all these soldiers breaking it down further, which then what happens, you have the pancreas here. I'm just going to draw the pancreas roughly. It breaks it down and it forms a micelles, which is just basically a smaller fat molecule. So then it sends a signal, okay, pancreas, now do your job. And the pancreas is going to basically, the pancreatic enzymes, the lipases, amylases, proteases, are going to break this food down even more for better absorption. So I hope that makes sense. I know this is a lot, okay? So we started off with the formation of bile salts, and all this is in conjunction with, one, a good gut microbiome, because remember, you need this gut bacteria to form the unconjugated, to form the conjugated, to recycle the bile salts, bile acids to bile salts. In addition, you need healthy bile. You need the gallbladder to blend it all. Now, what happens if the gallbladder is removed? Remember earlier, the function of the gallbladder is to concentrate all those ingredients that I have up there. So when you eat a food, it opens up. When you don't eat the food, it closes. When the gallbladder is removed, what's happening? Sure, it's still forming, but the problem is Like a leaky faucet, it says drip, drip, drip. And it's more diluted than concentrated. So this is where you're going to get the malabsorption of your fat-soluble vitamins, vitamins A, D, E, and K. This is where you're going to get chronic inflammation of the microbiome. You may get leaky gut. You may get depression. You may get that chronic shoulder pain due to the phrenic nerve. Now remember, I can't recommend any brands, but by taking these will support what you don't have. So I hope that helps. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. If you want to book me for an appointment, you know my webpage. I'll be more than happy to talk to you either